If you clicked on this video, I'm going to assume that you're a genealogy geek, a software geek, or both, because I'm going to go over GEDCOM files. This is aimed at software developers interested in how genealogical data is transferred and stored. But even if you're not into genealogy, you might be interested in how programmers 40 years ago chose to model a family. And that's because families are messy. When you look at your family tree in a pedigree chart, it looks like a simple binary tree of two parents fading back into history. But it's not that simple. It's not always just a mother and a father with their children. There's a fun Stack Overflow post from 2011 by a developer who found a bug in his genealogy program. One of his assertions had failed. The assertion was that a man cannot be both a father and grandfather of the same child, which is just not true, as the numerous answers demonstrate. A top comment links to a funny country song titled "I'm My Own Grandpa" by Ray Stevens. He outrageously abuses the rules of genealogy to prove that he's legitimately his own grandpa. The comments on that YouTube video have even more tales of genealogy oddities. It's worth a look. The question and song are both linked in the description. All right, let's take a closer look at GEDCOM's solution to modeling families. GEDCOM stands for Genealogical Data Communication, and it's used by sites like Ancestry, RootsMagic, and Family Tree Maker to store and transfer genealogical data. It was first released in 1984 and developed over the next 15 years. Development mostly stopped by 1999 with version 5.5.1. However, with the rise of genealogy sites over the next 20 years, there was renewed interest in the format. The latest version is called Family Search GEDCOM version 7, but trees exported from Ancestry conform to version 5.5.1, and that's the version I will be covering. As I go through a GEDCOM file, I'm going to demonstrate how Ancestry displays and uses the information, but it should be similar on other sites. All right, let's jump into GEDCOM files. GEDCOM files are really just human-readable text files, so you can open them up in any text editor. Some might argue about the human-readable part, but I think if it's presented in the right way, it's easy to understand. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code because it offers a feature called code folding, which will help us visualize the data. This is what a simple GEDCOM file looks like for a family of 3. Inside you'll find information you'd expect, like names, dates, and places. But it's hard to figure out how the lines relate to each other. It's confusing at first, but it's simple once you learn how. For this video, I'm going to work with a GEDCOM file exported from Ancestry. I'll show you exactly which fields in Ancestry relate to each line in the GEDCOM file. I'm also going to show you how entities like individuals, families, and citations are built up with GEDCOM lines. Before we look at a GEDCOM line, I'm going to create a simple tree with one person so you can see what it looks like in a GED file. So over in Ancestry, I'm going to come to the top and click on Trees, and then we're going to create and manage family trees. On the My Trees page, you'll see all the trees that you have. I'm going to create a new one. On the Start New Tree page, I'm going to add a home person. And in this case, I'm going to just do a fake person, Jane Miller, and she's a female, and that is all I'm going to add because I want to show you the simplest possible tree. I'm going to go ahead and click Continue. This goes back to the Start a New Tree page, but I don't want to add a father and mother. However, Ancestry wants to force me to do that. There's a way around it though. So if I come here and click Add Mother, it will show us this diagram to create a mother, but all I'm going to do is click Cancel. And then it'll ask me to name the tree. I'm going to call this tree GEDCOM. Now underneath that name, you're going to see a checkbox that says Allow others to view the tree. I am going to uncheck that because this is a fake person. And then I'll save my tree, and Ancestry takes us to the horizontal pedigree view. Now I'm going to export this tree, and it's pretty simple. I come over here and hover over the 3 dots, and then it pops up a menu for me. And in that menu, I'm going to click Tree Settings. And on the Tree Settings page to the right, you'll see an option called Manage Your Tree. And underneath that is a link called Export Tree. I'm going to click that. For larger trees, that could take a while, but this is really small. So I'm just going to download the GEDCOM file. And we see that it's downloaded as a zip file. When I extract this, there's our GEDCOM file. And I'm going to go ahead and open this. And it looks like this. Some of these lines you'll definitely recommend. We got this tree from Ancestry.com. We can see other information like Ancestry.com's address. And we can see the version of the GEDCOM file here, 5.5.1. And all the way down at the bottom, we can see the information that we entered. Here's a name, for example, the name Jane Miller, and her sex, which is female. A lot of this information is actually just metadata, which I'm going to delete now. I want you to see the base code for our single person Jane Miller. I'm going to come up here and delete all of this. And when I do, we're left with 7 lines. And this represents one individual. And that's what this indie means right here. One individual. And her name is Jane Miller. From this point, you can build up an individual by adding any amount of information. For example, I'm going to add a birth date and a death date for Jane Miller. I come back here to the horizontal pedigree view. I'm going to click on Jane Miller and choose Profile. And in Profile on the top right, I'm going to quick edit Jane Miller, and I'm going to say that she's deceased and has a birthday of 2 February 1922 in Salt Lake City, Utah, and that she died 50 years later on 2nd of February 1972, also in the same place. And then I'm going to go ahead and save that. I will also export it, and the resulting file looks like this. We can easily see that we've added her birth record of the date of 2nd February 1922 in Salt Lake City. But what does each line mean, and how does it relate to each other? How do these lines build up entities like individuals and families? Well, let's look at these lines one at a time. A GEDCOM line is the fundamental data structure in a GED file, and it has simple rules. I remember the rules using a visual mnemonic. I simply read the line from left to right while stating the rules. First, leading white space is insignificant. When you're reading a GEDCOM file, you ignore it, and when you're writing a GEDCOM file, you omit it. Next is a level. This value can be from 0 to 99. Level determines the structure of the record, which we'll go over a little bit later. This is followed by a tag. A tag is a string of 3 or 4 letters that describe what the line represents, in this case, Jane's given name. Some of these tags you will recognize, such as birth, note, child, and address, and some you definitely won't, such as NCIH for number of children, or ANCE for generations of ancestors. Then there's an optional value, such as a person's name or gender. And lastly, the GEDCOM line has a max length of 255 characters and is terminated by the line feed, carriage return, or both. There are other rules, but these are the 5 major ones. Now I'm going to show you how the level of a line determines the structure of a record. I'm going to format the GEDCOM line by breaking the first rule I mentioned, which is that white space is insignificant. I'm only doing it for this tutorial because it makes it much easier to see which lines are related to each other. I'm going to indent the lines once for each level. For example, if the level is 1, I'm going to indent 1 time. If the level is 2, I'm going to indent it 2 times, and so on. Let's see what that looks like in the GEDCOM file. We can easily see now how the lines are related to each other. You can see how GIVN and SURN, which stand for given and surname, are properties of the name, and the name is a property of an INDI, or individual. So what are the rules that determine this structure? Well, whenever you look at a line, you ask yourself, what does this line describe? To find out, keep looking at the previous lines until you find one whose level is 1 lower. I know that's a mouthful, so let's just look at an example. Take the line with 2 surname Miller as an example. Since the line we're on is level 2, I need to find the first line whose level is 1 less, in this case 1. The line just above it is 2 given Jane. Since this line has a level of 2, we have to keep going up. The next line above it is 1 name Jane Miller. Since this line has a level of 1, we know that 2 surname Miller further describes the name line. We can see this again with the line 1 name Jane Miller. Since its level is 1, we need to find the first line above it whose level is 1 less, in this case 0. So here's level 1, Jane Miller. We go up to the previous line and see 0, a number, and indie. We now know that Jane Miller further describes an individual. This method is used to build up all entities in a GEDCOM file. This feature is even more apparent when I minimize all of these properties of the individual. For example, if I close the name, birth date, and death, we can clearly see that an individual has 4 properties: name, sex, birth, and death. And we could add any more that we want. If I open up name, you're going to see similarly that that given and surname are both properties of name, which is a property of an individual. In this file, there are examples of 3 different formats for a line. On the first line, you see an example of a level plus a tag. In this case, it's level 0 with a tag of head, H-E-A-D. The birth and death have a similar format of a level plus a tag. On the second line, you see a level 0 record with a tag of INDI for individual. Its format is level plus ID, which is called a cross-reference ID, and a tag. On another line, you see an example of a level plus a tag plus a value. In this case, level 1, a tag of name, and a value of Jane Miller. There is a 4th pattern for this line, but I'll go over that when I talk about repositories, sources, and citations. All right, let's talk about level 0 records now. Level 0 records are special and follow different rules. That's because they represent the 9 fundamental entities in the GEDCOM specification. I will go over all 9 of them in this video, but I mostly want to focus on 4. They are INDI, which stands for individual. It represents facts about a single person. You can see these facts on Ancestry in the person's facts page. This includes things like birth, marriages, deaths, military service, that kind of thing. Then we have a FAM tag, which stands for family. I mentioned in the introduction that modeling families is messy, and the FAM record is evidence of that. GEDCOM version 5.5.1 has cultural assumptions about marriage baked in. Version 7 handles cultural differences in partnerships more gracefully, but for now, 5.5.1 is the de facto standard. Then we have the tag REPO, or repo, which stands for repository, and source, SOUR, which stands for source, and citations, which also use the source tag, but in a different way. Next, we have the head tag, HEAD, which stands for header. This is the first line of a GEDCOM file and contains metadata about it. Then we have sub-im, which stands for submitter. This contains metadata about who contributed to the tree. And finally, we have a TRLR, which stands for trailer, and it's the last line of the file. And then we have 2 more. One is note, which is self-explanatory. Remember, the max length of a GEDCOM line is 255 characters. I'm going to show you how you can extend that with the note record. And finally, OBJE, which stands for object. This describes any multimedia object like an image, audio, or a video. All right, let's expand Jane Miller's family by adding a spouse. All right, let's go ahead and build a family with a father, a mother, and their daughter. First, we're going to add a spouse to Jane Miller. On Ancestry, I'm on her facts page, and I'm going to click the Add Spouse button. And in here, I'm just going to add a fake person named John Smith. And his birth date is going to be 1 January 1911 in Salt Lake City, Utah, and he dies 50 years later on January 1st, 1961. And I go ahead and save that. And we see him here on the UI. Let's take a look at it in the GEDCOM file. I've removed all extraneous information like birth and death because I just want to focus on the information at hand. In this case, we can see we have 2 individuals. Here's Jane Miller. And then down here is the spouse we just added, John Smith. Now I want you to notice that in each of these individuals, we have a new line, 1 FAMS for family spouse, and it has a cross-reference ID or a pointer. Now I mentioned earlier that there was a 4th style of GEDCOM line, and this is it. And that is a level followed by a tag followed by a pointer. In this case, this is pointing to a family with an ID of F1. And then we see also that John Smith has the same line. It's a family S for a family spouse, pointing to a family called F1. And now we see a level 0 record for the family. There's 1 husband and 1 wife. The family record assumes 1 male partner, labeled as husband, and 1 female partner, labeled as wife. If there are more partnerships, another family record is created. The historical and technical reasons for this are explained in the 5.5.1 specification. The latest version of GEDCOM, version 7, goes into the future use of the family, husband, and wife tags. I'll be talking about this restriction later. Both specifications are linked in the description. Now back in Ancestry on Jane Miller's facts page, we're going to add a daughter. I come over on the right and click Add Family, then I select Daughter, and let me fill out her details. It'll be Sally Smith. She is deceased. She was born on 4 March 1944, And she died 50 years later in 1994. And there she is on the UI. Let's see what that looks like in a GEDCOM file. Here we see our three people now. Here's Jane Miller, here's John Smith, and now we have Sally Smith. I want you to notice something. She also has a pointer to the family record here, but she has a FAMC rather than a FAMS. That's because she's participating in this family as a child. So it points to family 1, and when we come down here to family 1, we have a new child tag for Sally Smith. Now this is the model of a 3-person family with a father, mother, and their daughter. All this information is great, but we all know sources are the basis of good genealogy. Let me go over what I mean by the terms repository, source, and citation. A repository is where the source is found. For example, that might be a library. The source itself is where the information is found. In this case, it might be a book. And the citation points to the information in the source, like a page number. Another example of a repository might be the US Archives, and the source in there might be a microfilm. And then the citation would point to the information in the source, like an image number of a document. Repository and sources don't need to be this formal though. Another example might be your grandma's house. The source could be the family Bible, and the citation could point to the birth records in that source. Let's jump back to Ancestry and look at Jane Miller's profile page so that we can add some sources and prove things like her birth. I'm going to click on Add Source. And the first question it asks us is, appropriately enough, which source are you using? In this case, we don't have one yet because we haven't made one. So underneath that drop-down, I'm going to click Create a New Source. On the Create New Source page, I'm going to enter some information. Normally I would use actual test data, but because I'm going to show you where this data is stored in a GEDCOM file, I'm going to describe the field itself rather than put data in it. For example, I'm just going to say birth certificate author and birth certificate call number and so on. Now down here at the very bottom, we see another drop down and it says select a repository, but we haven't created one yet. So just below it, I'm going to put create new repository. And in this case, I'm going to put the state records office. Again, this is fake information. Now it brings us back to the create new source, and we've already filled everything out. So I'm going to put save source. And then I'm going to enter out the information for citation. Now down below, it's going to ask you which facts or events you want to connect this source to. I want you to skip that for now and go ahead and hit submit. Now look on her profile page. We can see her birth certificate source, but when I click on it, it doesn't go to any events. And that's because I have not connected them yet. Because I want to show you what this all looks like in GEDCOM. If I click view on birth certificate, this is all my information. I'm going to jump back over to the GEDCOM file and show you what this looks like. In here we have two new level 0 records. The first one I want to go over is the repository right here. And then look at these lines. They all point directly to one of these fields in Ancestry. And then likewise, I'm going to go to source. And also all those fields are located in Ancestry in the source. That's actually it for sources and repositories. It's just a few fields. We'll link them to our facts in just a minute. Up here we have another source, which is our citation. So I'm going to go ahead and close the repo, and I'm going to close the source, and because I want to show you how citations are created. Now let's scroll up to citation, and I want to show you what it looks like. I'm going to open it up. The first thing I want to ask is what this citation is related to. If we go back to Jane Miller's individual record, we can see that it's added a new level 1 record, in this case source right here, and then a pointer, if you will, down to here to this source. This is how we know that this source under Jane Miller references this source, which is a level 0 record. This source belongs to the individual itself, not to any facts. And we can see this in Ancestry because it doesn't have the squiggly line that links to a fact. So now let's look at a citation, because this is only connected to her and not to the fact of her birth. I'm going to come to her birth certificate on Ancestry. I click view, and on the left we have associated facts. And in this case, I'm going to connect her birth right here. I click on the plus sign. And now when I click on birth certificate, I'm going to see this little squiggly line. That means it is connected to that fact. Now let me show you what that looks like in GEDCOM. Right down here, I've eliminated all the excess data for our repository and source. I care about the name of the repository, the name of the source, and then the pointer to the repository. I'm going to hide these for now and go up to our individual Jane Miller. Now notice we have another source here, and we got to ask, what is this source for? So we know this is level 2. We're going to go to the first line above it that is level 1. In this case, it is birth. This source is directly related to this birth. I want you to notice something. We have this source attached to us, but you'll notice that it has the same data as the source attached to the person. I don't know exactly why this redundancy exists, but this happens for each item you attach the fact to. For example, I'm going to go back to Jane Miller's Ancestry page, and on birth certificate, I'm going to add a new associated fact, and in this case, I'm going to put gender. Now, we're not going to see that on this Ancestry page because gender is actually up here in the quick edits, but I do want to show you what it looks like in GEDCOM. And as you may have suspected, we now have a citation under sex that has a link to the source of the birth certificate. And here I want to show you again that this has all the same data. Here's the same data, here's the same data, and here's the same data. I don't like this solution. I think it's a little clunky, but nevertheless, that is how a citation is created. Birth and death are 2 of the most important events in a person's profile, but there are ways to add other events. So let's go ahead and add a marriage. To do that, I'm going to come to the top here where we have a plus button, which allows us to add a fact. And in there, we're going to have a drop down that gives us a list of all the built-in events and facts inside Ancestry. But you'll notice that at the top, the birth, death, and marriage are kind of like the 3 fundamental ones. We've already done birth and death, so I'm going to add a marriage. All events have 2 properties that we care about, and that is the date and location. They were married on 3 March 1943 in Salt Lake City, Utah, and that's all we're going to add for now. Now we have this marriage, but it's not linked to anything. And now I need to add a source for that marriage. So I'm going to go ahead and add a source, create a new source. So I've entered the citation information, and now I'm going to connect it to the marriage itself. And here we see that we have a new source named marriage, and it is linked directly to marriage. I'd like to show you 2 other events, one that's built in and one that's custom. So I'm going to come over here to timeline, and I'm going to add a new event. And these are all the built-in events for Ancestry.com. So I'm going to come up here and add a fact for a residence. Remember, all events have 2 pieces of information that are required, and that is day. So I'm going to enter 6 June 1966 in Salt Lake City, and I'm going to add that. But the question is, what if you need a custom one? For example, let's say you got a really important letter that talks about birth information. So I'm going to add an event, and this time I'm going to add a custom event, which is right here. Now, a custom event asks you to enter a label. I'm going to just put letter. Now, let's say we got this letter in 5 May 1955 from Salt Lake City, Utah, and birth information. And I'm going to go ahead and click and add that. Let's see what the letter and residence events look like in GEDCOM. We jump back over here to Visual Studio Code, and the first thing we got to ask is, what are these events connected to? And they're connected to the person, to Jane Miller. And we can see them here. I want to point out the residence first. It's got a Resi tag with a date, place, and then our note, a red brick house. And then the other one is a custom event, which has a type property called letter, and that was our custom tag we added to it. And then of course has a date, place, and a note. Now we're going to talk about the note record. I'm going to use a pattern that is used throughout a GEDCOM file, including tags that are not notes, which allow us to extend the length of a line longer than 255 characters. To show you this, I'm going to jump back over to Ancestry, and now looking at the birth certificate, when I view it, I'm going to edit the source for the birth certificate. And in here, under the note, I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to add a large amount of text that is longer than 255 characters. And then also, you can put line breaks in there. This is where you would put stuff like transcriptions anyways. So I'm just going to add a line break and add another little bit of text. And then I'm going to save this source. And let's take a look at it in the GEDCOM file. I'm going to go ahead and maximize this so we can see that it is indeed very long text. At the very end, we can see that I still have over 50 characters to G, and that is a hard stop at 255 characters. And then we come back over to the beginning and we see another tag, CONC, and that stands for concatenation. What a CONC tag is it concatenates these two lines together without any line break or spaces or anything, straight up concatenation. However, I added a line break to it, and you'll notice that it added another tag called CONT, which stands for continued. In this case, you concatenate the two lines together, but in this case, you add a line break or line feed, depending on what you want. Now we might ask, I want to just point out that we notice that this note is level 1 and belongs to this level 0 record, which is our source, our birth certificate source. And again, I mentioned this pattern where you'll have a tag with a value, a very long value, followed by a concatenation or continuation is how we extend the length of a line longer than 255 characters. And finally, the last tag is the OBJE, or object tag. An object tag is any multimedia file, such as an image, audio, or video. And I'm going to show you how this tag is created by adding a portrait for Jane Miller. In Ancestry, I go ahead and click on her silhouette, and then I'm going to hit Upload Media, and I'm going to drag over a picture of this woman, and I'm going to hit Done. Now we see that we have a picture for Jane Miller. I want to show you one more thing though. If we come to her gallery, we'll see that the picture I just uploaded is also in her gallery. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in GEDCOM. If we jump over here, let's take a look at this 0 level object tag with an ID of 01. You will see that it's a file. It was indeed a JPEG file. The title was the name of the file itself, in this case Jane Miller, and then it has other information. The underscore tags are actually extension tags which Ancestry has added, and I will not be going over them in this video, but I do want to show you how this object is connected to Jane Miller. As we can see, it's a level 1 object connected to a level 0 indie record, and in here we have information such as how to crop this photo. This is what Ancestry added to center this in the middle of her profile picture, and you can see things like its left value, top value 14 pixels, and so on. And that covers the basics of a GEDCOM file and how you can create and manipulate your own. If this video helped you, please like and subscribe and share it with other genealogy or software geeks who might be interested in playing around with their own GEDCOM files.